Hello, coming to you from the corner of Morris and Queen. This is Atlantic News Podcast. My name is Chris Green. I'm the owner of Atlantic News. The Atlantic News, which is not the news outlet on television, but the last newsstand in town. And what we're doing on the podcast is interviewing the 6 candidates for the District 7 council seat. The voting starts tomorrow. A little bit of information on the voting, and I'll include the link on our site if you need to access this. Online voting starts tomorrow, October 8th, and it goes through October 19th. In-person voting, there are 2 days before Election Day, one on October 12th and one on October 15th. Then in Election Day, which is October 19th, the polls open throughout HRM, 8 a.m., close 7 p.m., and again, I will include these links because please go out and vote. And with that, I'd like to welcome William Breckenridge to the podcast. William, welcome. So as we do with authors, when we ask them, what's your book about? William, what's your candidacy about?
My candidacy is about caring for community, honesty, integrity, and using my experience to deliver the best value for people of our district and for HRM.
Great, thank you. And what's your profession? Where have you been working in your professional life?
Oh, there's a lot there. First off, I've been working for the past really 20 years in the financial sector in many different roles, and that is also part of my educational background. And also part of that is that I very much enjoy history, and so I've have my own tour guiding business, freelance, that I give to. As I feel it's very important as also being an ambassador to Halifax and learning and educating people about Halifax, but also learning from them about their places and growing and understanding maybe how can we apply this to Halifax. And it's always great to engage walking on the streets and having those conversations. Also, and I have my own research and historian attributes as well, which I've used very much to find information, and not just around history, but policies on planning and even policing or whatever it needs. I can find you the information you need. If you need to find the name of a book, maybe, Chris, I'll look that up for you. Nice. And those kind of things are what we need in a council. We need good communication, good listening, and being able to locate and direct, right?
Right, absolutely. So the being a historian and somebody that studied political science and who's new to Halifax, when you give your tours, what are the focus of your tours? That sounds really interesting.
Focusing on tours, it's great because you have to first judge your audience, because I've had groups of 120 teenagers.
It's like herding cats.
Exactly. And two bus loads, that I had to use to get that, and with a giant mic on my back, wireless. That was interesting, and they wanted to know about the Titanic, so we went into the cemetery, Fairview Cemetery. And then you have just a couple that's visiting from Pennsylvania, and they want to know how the city's growing, how the city's changing, so economics, culture, social makeup, and also about the history of the place. And I have to be able to explain all of this to them within, the 2-hour time frame, whatever they've chosen for their walkabout, if they want.
That is amazing. How do people find you? How do they find out about this service? It's something that when I have visitors, I think I'm going to knock on your door.
There is a site, Tours by Local, and I use that as a platform, and that way the site does the administration for you, and then you can connect with people. And the people that use that service want something off the beat. They just don't want to be shuttled into a large tour bus, as you often do when you're off a cruise ship or something like that.
Right.
They want something that's a different, unique experience that gives them value for where they're visiting and makes it a memorable moment. And I think even bringing that to a counselor desk as well is important, having an open mind and a broad experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was talking the other day to the man who runs Duels. Is it the used bookstore in Dartmouth?
Oh, yes, I have gone there for books, yes.
Yeah, and he was telling me he used to run a shop for the longest time over here in Halifax, and he was telling me about some of the tours. So it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, and that's a good place to get used books for when I'm trying to do all the research
I love that store.
on different things that are happening, about Point Pleasant Park
Right.
and about military, because you can't talk about Halifax without talking about the armed forces,
That's right.
and also, just about culture in general, urban planning, architecture. That's a big question that, local people have and also visitors have. It's about our architecture, which is very unique
Yeah.
in the world. And I
Right.
get that from visitors all the time that I take around.
And so the unique, again, being new to this spot, I grew up in California, married a New Brunswicker, lived here for about a year, so I'm really enjoying learning about this city, my new city. What about the architecture makes it unique? Is it the Georgian influence, or is it a combination of different styles?
It's called a eclectic vernacular, to be very professional about the term.
Yes.
Which means, it's a mix. There's a building where there's been adaptive rehabilitation of it. Even the Atlantic News building here, it's got the Second Empire kind of Queen Anne style top to it, but then it used to be a drugstore, and then
Right.
it was expanded, and then you have the storefront. So the house was altered and changed to meet the demands of the era of the time, and that's part of conservation work to do those things. But it's also about understanding your city and understanding that urban form can change and adapt, and how do we use our streets? How do we use our buildings? And how does that make for better adaptability and a sense of place, time, and security? Because our built environment impacts all those things. And in the downtown core here, we talk about a lot about security. Well, our trees, our urban form of buildings have all psychological impacts on us. And in university, and I took a lot of courses and things in psychology and behavioral for business,
Right.
and negotiation, and that's part of understanding where you go. Present your case, summarize, and then put it all together and make sure you're all on the same page, and that's where you can put in a conclusion.
Right. So there's a lot to unpack there, and a lot of things that you mentioned are issues in Halifax today. You've talked about your conservation work, and you mentioned your research business. Talk a little bit about your experiences in conservation efforts, research, and how that applies to if you become a counselor. How do those connect those two for us?
It's very deep because the work that is understood in city staff, I'm very familiar with a number of city staff. I'm very comfortable with that, and built a long rapport after 15 years of doing HRM committees and advocacy work. You build up an understanding of who to go to in the departments and who not to go to, and that usually takes a lot of people a lot of time, but I already have that. So
So how do you already have that? Help us out. Have you been working through your research? Have people come to you to help do research, and so that's tied you in with some past issues in the community? Or
Of course, yeah.
give us a story that brings that to life.
I can think of having a phone call from a staff member about the area that is going to be potentially new conserved. There's 4 new areas, and around Roby Street, and asking me, do you still have that information about that? Because I had been the one who researched it and helped those neighbors in that area submit the paperwork to get that all started. And so I said, oh, yes, I do. So I gave them, and then they implemented that, and that helped them in their starting of their work that they needed to get done quickly, because there's, with staff and that, there's always a time crunch. And that is something that needs to be fixed at City Hall. I mean, for the public to, on a Friday, for example, what's going on now is on a Friday, all the agendas for the next following week get put out, and then on Tuesday, City Council votes on it all.
In such a short turnaround.
In such a short term. So for the public itself, that's not really enough time to digest a 112-page report on maybe a specific issue.
Wow.
I go through the City Council reports every Friday.
So
or the committees that are going, because, council doesn't meet every week.
But the current system, and it was set up, intended to be this way, that Friday it's announced, and then the voting's Tuesday, so that's Saturday, Sunday, Monday. That's 4 days to...
Not really even, yeah.
So was it intended this way, or did it morph into this?
It's kind of always been like that. When I served on the city committees, the package agendas would come out to the members on Wednesday, a few days ahead, and then it would come out...
Then the vote is the following...
On Friday, then it would come out publicly on Friday. And so you can imagine being a councillor and getting the full council package, which it looks like the War and Peace doubled. Right?
And not as interesting.
It
could be interesting.
There's
right,
some
right.
fascinating topics in there.
Of course.
Into that.
So does that, what you just described, that sounds crazy to me. If I'm going to come in and be a councillor, how do I manage that? Does that process, or does that work? Does that need to be changed? Can it be changed?
Yes, there's things that can be changed with it, but it's about time delivery, staff HR organization, overall how reports are conducted and made, the information that is in there, the research that needs to be conducted, and that all bodes into, like, example of a new development. Well, what's the time frame of it? Well, if it takes 6 months for a staff report to be written, then that's 6 months that building isn't going to get built.
So then what, if you go into council, is there something you can suggest to help either tweak or change this process to make it more productive?
From a researcher standpoint, the research component needs to have a more standardized template to it.
Okay.
And make it so that it's projected out, and say we have this time, right, for these to come through.
Okay.
And that exists, and there is a whole platform system that staff can see when things are due, and then or councillors can see when these reports are coming up. But to the public, it's more about engagement with the public. The public doesn't know these things. I only know because I've been doing this kind of stuff for so long, and it's that inside understanding that where we can actually focus on improvement, and by that we can make faster and better engagement, and maybe even get buildings built faster.
Wow. Interesting. So
it's the little things.
Right. All the little things add up, don't they?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you've talked about your experience with conservation here in Halifax, your knowledge of Halifax, and where it's been. How do we as a city, and how do you as a councillor, put together the sometimes seemingly two different needs? On one hand, the need to protect our heritage and make sure this is a unique place where if people come, it doesn't look like every other city. How do you balance that with innovation and moving forward?
Well, in the report on empty lot taxes and vacancies that came out earlier in the summer, they noted that there was somewhere around 2,500 empty lots in the core of the city. You can look that report up and see all the statistics.
Yes.
It's a very good report as far as giving the facts and figures out.
So 2,500 empty lots.
2,500 empty lots was noted. I remember that number in my head.
So why is that happening?
It's because of
what's behind that?
The urban planning regimes and the time focus on making reports and developments, and like we did our own home renovation as well, small project as far as what the scope of what needed to be done in additional work, and we had 4 inspectors and giving 4 different answers, and it took 9 months to get an approval for something that we were fixing 500 square feet. It's tiny space.
So these empty lots exist, it sounds like the first answer is because the layers of regulation grinds everything to a halt?
And money as well, because we're doing an upzoning on that. So, and then these empty lots also are encouragement under the Canadian taxation codes and that lead to lower assessment values, right? And then that gets put onto the rest of us as taxpayers, because some ways, if someone's not paying over here, then someone else is paying more over there.
So who owns these 2,500 empty lots? Is it a number of individuals like yourself, small individual owners, or is it corporations?
Well, I don't own any property myself, to be clear.
Right. Okay. Oh, sorry.
But it's there's a number of lots that are owned by companies.
Are most of them owned by big corporations, or?
Yeah, I would say that there's quite a number of them, and that statistic would have to be looked. I'm not the type of person who doesn't quote unless I have it in front of me.
Yes.
So that would have to be a whole assessment that's done.
Okay.
And that was, I believe, part of that empty lot report.
So I interrupted you. You mentioned the empty lot report. What's the important takeaway from that report?
The takeaway is that, we want our city to grow. We want conservation to happen. And so we have an opportunity, as they say, to take care of the low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And do a retention and addition is a basic principle. So just like this building, right, where it's been retained, it's been adapted, and added on to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worked. And in our neighborhood around us actually has quite a high density rate. And one frustrating question I put to planners is, well, how dense is dense? How much do you want to see? Do you want to see 1 person per kilometer? Do you want to see 100 per kilometer? What is it? And they say, we want it dense.
Okay.
Okay. I say, okay, that's great. So I think that we are facing that we need better definitions to define more succinctly. And I've had those conversations before, and they say, oh, yes, we have that. Oh, I want better out of that. And to be able to put it into layman's terms, right, for the general public.
Yes.
To be able to digest that. And it's something I always get stuck on is, how do you put this into a terminology that maybe is 99% understood? Because if I said to you, vernacular architecture, you're going to, oh, what the heck?
Right, because the point is for the most number of citizens to be involved in the process. So as you say, if this is couched in terms that nobody understands, what good is it? In looking through the documents, which I'm sure are full of crucial information, the documents seem overwhelming that people have to get their head around. The suburban plan is 62 pages long. The ongoing regional plan, Phase 4, 353 pages long. The managed encampment plan, 59 pages long. The integrated mobility plan, 182 pages long. How does a councillor somehow take those and translate them into terms where citizens can understand what's going on? That seems overwhelming to me.
Not to me. I think
okay, well,
that's
good.
Because it's about having experience and knowledge, like I do.
Good.
To be able to handle that and digest it. I think the biggest challenge there is making sure you read it over thoroughly. And sometimes, speaking before council, I feel that on an issue, maybe the council didn't actually really read the report.
Right. Well, going
which
back,
I have full intention of reading everything through.
Well, it sounds like there's a pressure, something you mentioned before, where if the schedule comes out on Friday and there's a vote on Tuesday, I don't know, but I imagine some councillors come into a time constraint where they just don't have enough time to look at it? Or is
and
that...
we haven't even covered the amount of emails you get.
Right. Okay, so...
Everything from, as some councillors have said to me, from people asking you, come and get my cat out of the tree, to, oh, when can I expect the next urban form update for my 20-story building? Right?
Obviously, you are familiar with the challenges that councillors face. As you're describing to me your experience. So, what is the way forward here in terms of making this a doable job for a councillor?
I think it's thinking about it in a financial perspective of goal setting and expectations. We are all only human, and we all have to think things through and put more structure and strategy in to managing time. And being someone who is very busy with so many different things on the go always, and being part of so many different organizations, I think that being passionate about what you're doing is really important for all of us to understand and care about. If you have that, to use a little Greek, as I also know that as well, to have a little, cafe, a sense of life and tharos for your well-being, and patience as well. Because you have to have self-patience to say, oh, I'm on page 159, there's 2 more reports like this. That's important.
Yes. Back to, just to help me and maybe some of our listeners, when you're talking about the empty lot report, and that it's important to deal with the low-hanging fruit. Specifically, what's the low-hanging fruit we're talking about here?
It's the quick adaptability, because let's say, for example, the building across the street here, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, the back end of it, Dalhousie has that, and they could add something onto the back of it for student housing, right?
We're talking catty corner from Atlantic News. There's what used to be the hospital is now a parking lot.
Right. Yeah. So, that's an empty lot there.
Dalhousie owns it.
Dalhousie owns it.
So what's the low-hanging fruit? To get rid of regulations so they can do something, or force them to do something?
Work to partner with them to, see how they can get that lot filled quicker, for right up front, and also make sure that the planning process is easy and seamless, right? Because you don't want to get stuck 3 years of trying to plan for a building in just policy and procedure, that you have to meet this regulation or that regulation. It's about streamlining, and like I said, don't have 4 inspectors show up and give 4 different answers.
That slows up the works. And so
it slows up the work.
So this is something the council can do if they're organized. They can manage this process to make it more streamlined. Is that what I hear?
The staff can put in reports, and you have to remember, government works on administration and governance, right? So the staff are the administrators, and the councils are the governance of it, right? So they have to be in tandem, and you have to have that already built connection between them to make sure that things work, and that councillors have it already up here to match the knowledge of the staff, so that they don't always have things right in reports. If I've seen things where they've said, 30% of people like this, but then they left out the 70% and didn't say whether they were for it or against it. I've seen that on reports. And that's not good governance transparency when you have that in reports. And that makes for poor public engagement, poor factual knowledge, and bad communication, which are all things that over this past terms, particularly the past 5 years, I would say, has been more and more, you hear at the doors, you hear from neighbors, as a challenge. And with local advocacy groups trying to do whatever they need to make what they're trying to do work. And I've heard that from many different groups.
So the number of vacant lots in Halifax, did we say 2,500?
In the core area, there's a larger number.
Even larger than that. So the question is, that large number of vacant lots, how is that contributing? What is the connection to that to the homeless issue and the affordability of housing? Is there a connection there, and what is it?
Because a number of in the core area, there's been quite a lot of demolition going on that's made vacant lots. So there's a pro-demolition stance to the point that there was a report about surplus HRM property that the real estate division put out that manages all of HRM's property. There's a particular division for that. And they said, well, if you have a HRM-owned vacant building, it should be demolished. And that idea carries over into the planning department, all the tax laws as well, incentivize that. And so what happens is a loss of affordable units that are current.
Because those affordable units were demolished.
And once they're gone, they're not returning.
They're not coming back.
And you can look in the paper from across Canada, the stats on that.
So this is happening cities across Canada.
And I harken back to the Cogswell interchange when that was built, and thousands of buildings were demolished and people were put out, displaced. And we're hearing about that now because they're trying to build it back. Right. And when I take people on visits up to Citadel Hill and show them what Halifax looked like at one time, they're blown away by how much things have grown and changed. And that's all a positive. It's all about how you go about it.
So how do we address this problem where you used to have affordable housing, these units were demolished, now they're vacant? How do we put that back on the right track?
Well, one thing is that other cities have done is a vacant lot tax and try to push people with carrot and stick method to be plain and frank.
So right now, if you have a vacant lot, you don't pay a tax on it.
You're not going to pay any extra tax. In fact, you're going to pay less tax because the assessment goes down.
Because there's no building on it.
There's no building. So I'm for not.
An empty lot tax will raise the opportunity cost of doing nothing.
We have to disincentivize doing nothing.
Okay. Yeah. So that makes sense to me. You mentioned before when people talk about density, there's a lack of precision to what we're talking about. That brings up in my head this issue of the accelerator fund and this idea of increasing density. Tell me a little bit about, and for listeners that need help, where are we with the accelerator fund? That's been passed. Is that guiding our practice? And what did that accelerator fund do? That offered federal money to increase density. Is that right?
And it's playing politics with zoning and planning is what it was doing.
Okay. How so?
Is actually there's putting in policy. That's great, right? You can talk.
Meaning like we need more density. That's policy.
But that's policy.
Yeah.
Or that we can make this building 2 stories and this building 3 stories.
Right. And people can debate that and vote it down. So
debate is an understatement. You can go to war over it.
But you said this is not that. This is politics.
It's politics at for the federal level because they're trying to deal with making it look like they're doing real action. We do need flexibility in making zoning work for different multitudes of types of buildings and how we do that. But that could have been achievable at a local ground level, which the center plan
which already existed.
Was trying to address all of that.
Am I right? The accelerator plan now has replaced the center plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Its zoning has changed all of it, right? And no real public engagement around it. And we know we need to act fast on things, but you have to look at the long term. Look at the Cogswell. What happened? The urban renewal policies that went in then shaped that and said, we go car-centric and build
Like
this
a
whole highway.
A Robert Moses sort of idea. Let's make this a car central.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we turn around and go, uh-oh, that didn't
Not
work.
a good idea.
Not a good idea 50 years later.
So then tell me with where we are with the accelerator plan, what is the way forward there? What can council do to manage this for the betterment of the city?
For the accelerator fund, we need to look at the neighborhoods themselves. We have established neighborhoods. What that does is didn't really factor in disruption of those, like up, for example, along Roby Street in the Woodhill area, which I got as a potential
Where's
heritage
the Woodhill area? Help me. Roby and what? What would be the cross
Charles
street?
and Willow.
Okay.
And at those points, there are co-ops that are up there, so real already built-in affordable places. And if you were to suddenly plunk 20 stories next to it, how would that affect the tax assessment?
Right.
How's that going to do that in far as movement of people, place, and how do we better look at defining through the accelerator fund our notion of density on an area,
And what's
right?
best for this particular
What's best
area
for this,
we're talking
because
about.
they did what's blanket zoning, right?
So what you're talking about, is that possible?
It is totally possible. It is, but
It just has to be framed in such a
think-
way to allow for those discussions.
and the engagement to the whole general public felt so rushed, and we
Yes.
know that through the news and the feedback, particularly in our district here, was very, there was a lot of loud voice against that, and I had both sides, talking to, and I think that overall, we need to respect our neighborhoods. We need to engage our communities.
And be able to retain control to make them look the way we want them to going forward.
Right, and spending $79 million coming in from the feds, and most of that going towards for purchasing, or I shouldn't say purchasing, but hiring more staff, when that money should have gone directly into building real affordable units. And Nova Scotia has one of the lowest rates of building community housing of any type.
Right.
And there's I call it community housing because there's negative stigmas around saying affordable housing or
Right. Nobody
public
wants
housing.
affordable housing built near them, do they?
And so, to have community and diversity built into an architectural form.
Right.
And I'm sorry if I'm getting complicated with that. But
No. So, but what you're talking about is possible for the council to do if it's framed in the right manner. Do I have
if
that?
it's framed,
do I have that
and
right?
framed under the Halifax Charter and all those things, and that's right, we really go deep dive. And I'm trying to be holistic. In
Right.
approach.
No, I appreciate that. Like, for example, along Roby and what is that?
Jubilee.
Yeah, Jubilee and Roby. From what I understand, on that corner, there's that white building with the columns.
The Caldwell House.
Yeah, but then across from there, from what I understand, those two apartments are going to be torn down.
And pretty much anything along Roby Street, eventually, I would say from Coburg Road up, is either torn down or will eventually be torn down.
And why is that? Because those look like viable mid-range housing for people to live in.
Yeah, the missing middle, right?
Right.
Why are we destroying that one?
So
and
why
then
is that-
saying we need it?
Why is that happening?
Well, that's because of the corridor zoning plans that were put in. Vancouver and other places, I've heard, axed those a while back.
But Halifax is going forward with this.
Halifax is going forward. Halifax has always been this kind of step thing, and I've been educating myself for a long time and saying, no, let's try something different.
So along Roby, we're eventually going to have all high rises.
Somewheres around the 10-story mark in certain
areas.
it's a corridor.
And that's been
zone.
decided that's going to happen.
That's been decided, and also $76 million in a FOIPOP that the Friends of the Common found out to widen the road. And hey, we need rapid transit. And my father is retired from Halifax Transit.
Mhm.
I can tell you some stories there.
Yeah, I bet.
And we need that to work. However, there's other ways that we can go about that without widening roads.
Without widening. Okay, so that you mentioned transit. Let's move to that. What are the two big issues that everybody's talking about? Housing and traffic and transit. So you mentioned one vision, and it sounds like this train has maybe left the station about these main corridors, widening them, putting in rapid transit. You mentioned there's other ways to do it.
Because we have roadways of organization. Right now, the buses get stuck in places.
Because they're stuck in traffic.
They're stuck in traffic. But if you're one of the bus operators and you're looking at it going, well, why are we going down Lacewood when we could go down Kempt Road and there's not as much traffic down there? And maybe have that and just say that's the only place the buses, for buses only. Maybe think about reorganizing the roads. Also with traffic, better traffic lighting control is a centralized system across the whole city, right? But then you're looking also at a municipality that's approximately, staff have told me, as high as the Prince Edward Island as a municipality.
Wait, say that again? Sorry?
The Halifax Regional Municipality
HRM
is approximately the same size, covers the same land
as the entire PEI.
As the entire PEI.
So
you can look that up.
So with amalgamation, you mentioned an amalgamation has been the case since what, 96?
96, yeah.
And it's interesting. My wife, she's from St. John area, and a lot of people in New Brunswick talk about, well, if we should amalgamate because Halifax did it and it was so good for them. Now I know amalgamation is reality here, but it sounds like am I boiling this down to too simple of a notion? But it sounds as though amalgamation means that the city has to provide services, bus, for example, for the whole HRM, but there's not enough tax money coming from those suburbs to pay for it. Do I have that right, or is that too simplistic?
I think there's always more complexity to things that the public is not aware of.
Right.
And we need to look at neighborhood commuting as well. I studied geography in university.
So neighborhood commuting, what's that mean?
It means, having, for example, when I traveled to Athens, the neighborhood where I stayed in has their own little commuter transit bus that goes around within that set district neighborhood.
So this is something we could do within Bedford, within Dartmouth, within Spryfield.
Right, and then those could be those little buses, like an excessive bus style size bus, could then bring those people down into
Mumford or wherever.
Mumford or where it goes. So you have smaller vehicles on the roads.
So that makes sense to me. Has that idea been discussed?
There's
here
been
in
discussion
Halifax?
about everything from there to light rail, back and forth. If you go back in the
So it's been discussed, but nothing moves forward.
Nothing moves forward. So my thing is.
So how does that change?
How does that change? It's called where there's a will, there's a way, and I'm the will. So let's get this done already.
Ooh, that's a good logo. Yeah.
I think we're all fed up with just having discussion after discussion. Let's cut the meetings out, and let's do the investment.
But give me so let's be specific here. So is what you mentioned about the regional buses in the different areas outside of the center, putting those smaller groups in, and then having that feeding into a larger system that brings people in.
That's all part of rapid transit system.
Is
right?
that possible to implement in Halifax?
I believe so. I believe so.
What would it take? Money?
It takes money.
Is that it?
Money, organization, structure, and also looking at the whole road system as a whole. And we need to cut down time delays. When a friend of mine takes an hour and a half to get into the city
on rapid transit.
What's now our rapid transit?
I don't know what's rapid about that, but
I don't know. But then that's why there's some candidates are talking about light rail. I've looked into trackless rail,
like streetcars.
Well, these are particular ones, and there's great videos on YouTube with them showing them. They have better suspension on them, so it's a smoother ride.
So what are we talking about? Light rail. So is this is on a track on the bottom? Is it?
No, they go operate on asphalt. These are trackless tramways and they're like they're a cross between an accordion bus and a a rail car.
A streetcar.
A streetcar, yeah. And they're fascinating. I call them caterpillars.
So how is that an advantage over a regular bus?
They're better suspension to them, so it's a smoother ride.
Okay.
They hold a lot more people at once.
Okay.
And so you're moving more people faster, right?
And so this, like this other idea of the local small buses, all it takes is spending?
Is spending and organization, getting the plan, strategy implemented.
Now with the spending, does the council have the ability to raise that money to spend it on that?
Well, we have to look at the budget, and until you get into the so-called proverbial council hot seat, you're not going to be able to see. From what I can see, the 19th century taxation system we have is not working for us.
Meaning most of the money comes from property tax?
From the property tax.
So how do we change that to make the city better?
You have to work with the province.
Work with the province.
So work with the province.
If the money doesn't come from property tax, where does it come from?
There's other ways, in other cities like Venice and that, they charge small tax for someone to come and visit the city. There's other means.
A usage tax. You talked about a tax on vacant lots. There's a lot of different ways to spread that money around rather than
trying to reduce the burden on the property tax owner themselves, without increasing the actual rate, current property tax rate. And it's about re-looking at how assessments and valuations are done on properties, and that causes disparities along the way too. So tax is very, very complicated, and I'd be happy to personally knock on the Premier's door and say we've got to fix this. What we've created in the province of Nova Scotia is you've got HRM, and that's the big place to go, right? And then
you're talking within Nova Scotia.
Within Nova Scotia, we have to start also thinking of the big picture, right?
Right.
Which is that this is the largest city, and it is getting larger, and there's talk about wanting 1 million people. We don't have the infrastructure to deal with that. When we had to replace the lateral line at my home, that cost a lot of money.
The lateral line, the bus line?
No, for the sewer.
The sewer. Okay, yeah.
So we're going between transit and sewers, but at the end of the day, it all boils down to one thing: money.
It's municipal spending. Sure.
It's municipal spending, and we have to account for all of it. Is the message I'm trying to say.
And this is a discussion that among at least two levels of government, right? Provincial and municipal.
Provincial and
municipal. There has to be a communication.
And
there.
Definitely with federal,
and
because
federal.
we have to prepare our transit, and our other infrastructures, our amenities, our current building stock for the climate change issues that are facing. We had fire and floods. Well, the only thing we were lacking last year was locusts.
Don't mention that; it might happen.
Please no.
So what you're talking about, is this possible? Is it possible for the council to lead this discussion to make these changes? Because these changes sound very large.
They are large, and it's going to mean, as I would say, an approach to a customer coming into me and asking, I have an investment, how should I handle that block of money, right? And you never put your eggs into one basket. So you're going to have to come up with an actual strategy report plan of breaking it down. So we have aging sewers. Then we need to say, okay, this zone we're going to do this year, and this is the amount of money we need for that. And the other thing is the cost of contingency budgets as well. 35% contingency budget is too high, and that means you haven't done your homework. When they
spell it out. What's a contingency budget?
That's just for things you might not expect on a building project, right?
Okay.
So just like on Almond Street when they were putting in the bike lane, they said, "Oops, we didn't realize the tram.
We needed to do this, this, and this."
Yeah, we didn't realize the tram lines were still there.
Okay.
Well, you could have knocked on my door. I would have told you. In fact, there's a map in City Hall, I believe, on the wall.
So
that
how does
shows the
something
turn
go
lanes.
forward without having that information? Not enough time taken? Not careful enough?
Due diligence.
Due diligence. Yeah.
As an engineer, not knowing, and even as I say, back to fixing the sewer line coming into my own home, they brought in a camera saying we don't know where the line is. Oh, well, the pipe's right on this side. You just draw a straight line. Usually pipes are pretty
And if the
straight.
government doesn't know, I mean, shouldn't they know?
Well, shouldn't Halifax the water know where their pipes are?
Yes.
And I said no. And what was fascinating is I kept a piece of it. It's clay. It was a piece of clay.
So that's been in there a while.
Oh, from the 1880s, yeah.
From the 1880s.
And that's what's on the peninsula, particularly in this neighborhood where we are, where Atlantic News is. Those are the oldest pipes in the city. And there was actually a professor I know who wrote a paper about sewers. Now,
Dirty job, somebody has to do it.
Somebody has to go down in there and fix those pipes for us.
Right.
And we like to see the flowers, the trees, but underground is stuff that council has to address.
Well,
as
that's driving it. Briefly about bikes. Is the city on the right track to creating a transportation network where it's safe for bikes and it gives people incentive to ride bikes? Would you say are we on the right track, or do we need to get on the right track?
It's a mixed question, really, because
yes.
We have to factor in we're on a peninsula where our streets aren't going to get any wider than what they are.
And how do you, if you have to widen a street to bring in a bike lane and cut down a tree, that seems like cutting off your nose to spite your face.
It does. It really does. And where our objectives and where our goals, and a mature tree doesn't equal the same as a sprout. Right? In what it can offer.
So give me one idea or one move forward. You get into council. What's a good move to help support bikes?
To help support bikes, we need to look at how the present plan for a network has been and is being implemented, and where the cost of that is going. And I think there was a missed opportunity on Spring Garden Road for that redevelopment to at least make one side of the street with a bike lane on it. And it's a main commercial street. We could have had that, and then kept Moore Street for traffic.
Right.
And I mean, but the thing is, I don't think from dealing with this kind of stuff all the time that you'll ever get a happy answer for everyone.
Well, no.
And
that's government, right?
But
You
we
have to
need
look at the definitions.
we definitely need active transportation, and we need to think about pedestrians as well. We need to think about accessibility and for disabilities, and we need to put that into a plan. There was a lot of controversy from the CNIB about not making the right tactiles when crossing the roads and stuff. And even when we're making the curbs here, I've been with friends who are with wheelchairs, and there was just because the angle of the curb was just a little up, they couldn't get over it. You had to give them a push. Shouldn't have we thought of those things when we were doing, and shouldn't have those been inspected? Like, that's part of what I want to do, is make sure that we have good enforcement, good inspection, and sticking to the compliancy of what we're putting in, right? And then that will be cost savings overall. And let's not build, if you're going to build a bike lane, for heaven's sakes, don't just end it to nowhere and have it cut off in the middle on Duffus. It just went.
And that's what we have now.
That's what we have now. So that's what I mean. We need, if you're going to do that, make sure it's done in a connective way and mass utilizes space. Like I say on Spring Garden Road, I think, in my opinion, one side should have been used on the winding part of it for that.
Right.
And it would have then alleviated the pressure of having a bike lane both ways down on Morris Street here. So then the merchants, we could still keep maybe this two-way for buses, so that what the merchants were saying about keeping the street closed for a special event, and now they won't be able to. That's all out in public. The letters that the recent would still be able to happen, because the
Right, you and I attended a street fair on Spring Garden, which was a nice event.
great event.
It was closed.
Great event. I mean, that's why we spent that much money, millions, tens of millions of dollars, basically. What was it, 10 to 12 million, somewhere around there, on redoing Spring Garden Road. And I look at it and go, well, I think there could have been better done for increasing the security of the feel of it through security, because, as I say, for policing and security around us, the feel of the street, the trees, that all helps with that.
Right, of course.
And because you have peripheral zones of vision, making sure you can see behind you, where around you, more where around surroundings, making it a more warmer and comfortable feeling environment will help reduce pressures on security around us.
Yeah.
You might not think about it, but it's real.
Of course, these are connected, these different issues. We've had a nice discussion. In terms of brevity, we're about at the end of our talk. The last question I ask is, what is something, I know all you candidates are very busy, there's not enough time in the day, but what's something recently you've either read or watched on the small screen, watched on the large screen, heard on a podcast that you found interesting enough that you'd like to pass on to people?
That's a good question, and I think that reading some of the international news, I like reading international news, and you're seeing how I try to always read that to interrelate it to stories here, and seeing how things are being dealt with, or concerns, and with the housing, with transportation, as you're saying about laneways, how that's all being handled. All the other cities around that world are having those discussions too. So the message out there to Halifax is we're not alone in having these issues. And last year, in November 2023, I traveled to Egypt, to Greece, and to France.
Nice.
And that was something of a lifetime experience to have, to do all of that all at once and get to go to all these different places and experience and see how that all relates. So when you say about what's the latest thing you've read, well, I'm talking about the news that's coming out in the international news.
International news. Where do you get your international news?
BBC, the Greek Reporter. There's other international newspapers that you can get online that are totally free, and they have different viewpoints and articles. The Guardian,
which is so important, isn't it?
It's so important, and so that's why I put that out there to people, to open your mind, keep an open mind always, think outside of the box, and when I'm answering all the questions that I have, I'm trying to keep things so that, yes, there is definitely actions that can be taken, but I want to hear from people your thoughts and be communicating that through, because at the end of the day, if we all work together, then we have a better approach to it. And that just comes from being a twin. I was born a team, so
yes.
I'm very good at team playing.
Oh, my father was a twin. I that sounds familiar. Well, William, thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you the best of luck in the rest of the days of the campaign. But again, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate this time and opportunity.